The morning light slid across the glass towers of downtown Atlanta, but inside Meridian Global's headquarters, the air was still sharp with the smell of polish and power. Men in tailored suits and women in stiff heels hurried across the marble lobby, badges flashing as security scanned them in. In the midst of that bustle, a child appeared, small, brown-skinned, wearing a neatly pressed dress that seemed a little too grown up for her frame. She carried a leather folder tucked beneath her arm as if it were armor. "Good morning, sweetheart," the receptionist said gently, leaning over her desk. "Are you lost? This isn't a place for school tours." The girl shook her head, standing, as tall as she could. "I'm not lost. I'm here for the interview. My mama's name is Denise Carter. She was supposed to be here at 9. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied with the determination only children forced to grow up too fast can summon. The receptionist blinked. Confusion etched across her face. "An interview? Yes, ma'am." She couldn't come. She's at Grady Memorial. She can't breathe good right now. But she worked all night on her presentation, and she told me never to give up. The girl carefully placed the folder on the desk. "So I came instead." At that moment, a tall figure in a gray suit paused nearby. He was a man people usually noticed before he even spoke. Malcolm Harlan, CEO of Meridian, was known for being relentless, for never letting emotion cloud judgment. 49 years. Old, sharp in every angle, his reputation was one of brilliance and cold efficiency. Yet something about the child's composure tugged at him. "What's happening here, Diane?" he asked, his deep baritone cutting through the quiet hum of the lobby. The receptionist straightened quickly. "Mr. Harlan, this young lady says she's here in her mother's place. Her mother had an interview scheduled for the project management opening." Harlan turned his gaze toward the girl. His eyes, usually icy, softened a fraction. "What's your name?" "Amara," she said, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Amara Carter." "And where is your mother now, Amara?" "In the hospital. They took her last night. She has pneumonia, but she'll be okay. She told me not to let this chance go." Amara pressed her lips together, as though holding back the flood of fear behind them. For a long moment, Harlan simply studied her. The folder beneath her arm looked almost comically large, but her small hands clutched it with a kind of dignity that silenced the busy lobby. Against every rule of corporate order, against the very instinct that had built his empire, Harlan found himself intrigued. "Amara Carter," he said slowly. "I've interviewed thousands of people in my career. But this is new." He extended his hand. "Come with me. Let's see what your mother prepared." The receptionist gaped, but said nothing as Harlan guided the girl toward the private elevator. The mirrored doors closed, sealing them, into a moment that neither quite understood. On the 40th floor, the city stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Harlan's office was more like a museum of victories, framed magazine covers, stock charts frozen at record highs, and family portraits noticeably absent. He gestured toward a chair far too plush for a child, but perfectly suited to the solemnity. Amara carried. She climbed up carefully and placed the folder on her lap. "My mom worked hard on this. She wanted to show how she saved her last company money, even though they didn't always treat her fair." Harlan arched a brow. "Tell me what she does." "She's a project manager. She has a PMP certificate. She finished her MBA at night while working 2 jobs." Amara opened the folder with deliberate care, flipping through charts and certificates her mother had tucked inside. "She worked at Westfield Tech until they shut down last month. She's real good with people, and she knows how to fix things when they're falling apart." Her small finger landed on a chart. "She saved them this much money last year." Harlan leaned forward, scanning the neatly arranged documents. He was impressed, not by the numbers alone, but by the meticulous way they had been organized. It spoke of someone thorough, someone determined. His gaze flicked back to Amara. "And why does your mother want to work here?" Amara hesitated, then answered with the kind of honesty adults usually smother. "Because we need the insurance. And because she says your company does big work, important work that matters." The directness hit him harder than any boardroom presentation. He thought of the countless polished candidates who had sat in that chair, rehearsed lines spilling from their mouths like water through a sieve. None had disarmed him the way this child just had. "Who's taking care of you while your mother's in the hospital?" he asked quietly. "My neighbor, Miss Ruth, but she's old and she can't walk good. Mostly I take care of myself." She lifted her chin. "I can make my own lunch. I don't need much." Something tightened in Harlan's chest. He had built walls around himself for years, bricked up with achievement and power, and yet this 7-year-old was scaling them without even trying. And your father? Amara's gaze faltered for the first time. He left when I was a baby. Mama says he wasn't ready to be a dad. She shrugged, as though it were a simple fact instead of a wound. It's just us. But we're strong, silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Harlan pressed his intercom. Janet, clear my schedule. His assistant's voice crackled back, incredulous. Sir, you have the quarterly briefing and reschedule it, he interrupted. And call Grady Memorial. Find out which doctor is treating Denise Carter. Amara's eyes widened. You're going to see her? Yes, he said simply, standing. Your mother raised someone remarkable. I'd like to meet the woman who did that. As they rode the elevator down, Amara looked up at him with curiosity. Why are you helping us? Mama says people like you are always too busy. The question pierced him. Why indeed? He had lived his life by numbers and deals. Not compassion, yet here he was, holding the hand of a child he'd just met. He exhaled slowly. Let's just say you've done what most of my executives can't. You got my full attention. Amara smiled, revealing the gap of a missing tooth, and slipped her hand into his. The simple gesture of trust shook him more than any hostile takeover ever had. Neither of them realized it yet, but this moment would alter the course of their lives in ways that reached far beyond a single interview. They reached Grady Memorial through a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked coats, the kind of morning where everything feels slightly tilted. At the nurse's station, Malcolm introduced himself, and the charge nurse glanced from his card to Amara's small hand wrapped around his thumb. Something in the nurse's expression softened. Room 512, she said. She's on oxygen, but she's awake. As they walked, Malcolm felt the hum of the hospital settle under his skin. The polished certainty of boardrooms didn't live here. Here, decisions were measured against heartbeats and breath. A phlebotomist pushed a cart past them and offered Amara a sticker. The girl chose a star and pressed it carefully to her folder as if declaring, in the quiet way children do, that something good could still happen today. Denise Carter sat propped, in bed when they entered, the nasal cannula tapering along her cheeks, the plastic line catching the light in a small arc. She had the tired, luminous beauty of a person too busy surviving to waste time performing strength. Baby, she exhaled, reaching for Amara's fingers. You're supposed to be with Miss Ruth. Her eyes flicked to Malcolm and stiffened. Polite, guarded. Sir? I'm Malcolm Harlan, he said evenly. Your interview was on my calendar. Your daughter advocated for you. He watched the play of emotions across Denise's face. Mortification, fear, and then a measured calm. That impressed him more than any resume could. She squeezed Amara's hand and nodded toward the chair. Sit, love. We're okay. I'm sorry, Denise said, turning back to Malcolm. I would never send my child into your building, not if I had any other choice. She's brave. I should have told her to call and reschedule, but she knows how much we need this. I took a turn last night. The ambulance came and everything went quickly. She gestured toward the folder in Amara's lap. I left that by the door. I was still editing slides before the fever spiked. You don't owe me an apology, he said, surprised at the gentleness in his own voice. You owe yourself a fair shot. He pulled a chair closer. Up close, he could see the small scar at Denise's temple, the kind you get from bumping into the world while moving too fast between shifts. Tell me what I can't read on paper. Denise inhaled carefully. Westfield Tech downsized in April. I led a team that delivered 2 major product launches early and under budget. Before that, I was at a logistics firm, managed a cross-functional group across 3 states. I build systems that hold under strain. She paused, eyes flicking to Amara and back. 8 interviews in 2 months. The smile changes when they learn I'm a single mother. The questions turn coded. Reliability. Cultural fit. Flexibility. One manager asked who watches my daughter when I'm working late. I told him the same people who watch your employees' sons. He didn't laugh. Malcolm felt heat rise in his chest. An old heat that belonged to years he didn't allow himself to remember. His mother in a bus depot uniform on the south side, the way she wore her name tag like a shield. The way people used the word fit to push her into corners. He chose silence instead of confession and studied Denise's steady gaze. She wasn't petitioning. She was accounting. "Ms. Carter," he said after a moment, "the work you've done is evident. The problem isn't your record." He thought of the lobby downstairs, oil-smooth floors, the choreography of privilege, and of Amara standing her ground in a space designed to make people feel small. "I can move your official interview to Monday. We'll arrange accommodations for a remote component if you're not ready to travel." And he paused, catching himself before he reached for the old reflex. "Write a check, solve a symptom, and I'm instituting a pilot in my division. Structured flexibility, outcomes-based evaluation, emergency childcare credits. It shouldn't take an act of courage from a 7-year-old to surface common sense." Denise's mouth trembled once, then steadied. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of nights counted in inhaler puffs and rent due dates. "I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking for a fair run of the same race." She turned to Amara. "Did you look him in the eyes like I taught you?" Amara nodded solemnly, and for the first time there was a glint of humor between mother and child, a small bridge across the machine's steady beeping. They spoke logistics. The test project he'd ask her to walk through, the cross-functional pain points she'd be invited to diagnose. When a respiratory therapist came in to adjust Denise's oxygen, Malcolm stepped back to the window and looked out over the city. From this angle, the skyline looked less like a promise and more like a question. Who gets to belong here and on what terms? He remembered the sensation in the lobby when Amara had taken his hand. It had felt like an audit of him. On the way out, he stopped at the billing desk, then thought better of it and kept walking. Money mattered, but this wasn't a charity play. If he was going to do anything meaningful, it needed to be structural, not performative. Back in the corridor, Amara tugged his sleeve. "Is my mom going to be okay?" "She's in good hands," he said. It wasn't empty reassurance. It was a choice about how the next hours would feel. "And she has you." Amara nodded. Gravity. Beyond her years. "She says when people don't see you, you have to see yourself first." She considered that, then added in a whisper, "Sometimes it's hard." He crouched so their eyes were level. "Sometimes it's hard," he echoed. "That doesn't mean you're wrong." For a second he saw his own reflection in her pupils, the stoic man executives feared, and felt the inadequacy of it. He stood and guided her back toward the elevators. "I'll have a car bring you after school Monday. Only if Ms. Ruth approves," he added, because boundaries mattered. "Deal?" "Deal," she said, the star sticker on her folder catching the light like a small promise. By noon he was back in his office with that folder open across his desk, pages spread like a map he'd been too proud to consult. He called HR. When Victoria, the director, appeared in his doorway with a tablet and the cautious smile of a person who keeps files for protection, he didn't invite her to sit. "We're going to pilot a flexible framework in operations," he said. "Outcomes over optics. I want a draft by tomorrow." She blinked. "With respect, Malcolm, the last time we tried Flex, managers complained about coordination, and there are compliance exposures, not to mention the perception that we're bending standards for one candidate." She pronounced "one candidate," like a warning label. "We're not bending anything," he said. "We're fixing a tilt." He tapped the portfolio. "This is not theory. It's lost value. We'll build the policy so it benefits the work and the worker, not one person." He watched her weighing the politics. "If you need case studies, pull the numbers from firms already beating us on retention. And if anyone murmurs culture, fit, send them to me. We'll discuss who's culture and who's fit." When she left, his assistant hovered in the doorway. "You canceled 2 investors to go to a hospital," Janet said mildly, a lifetime of unruffled competence in her posture. "Shall I reschedule them for after you turn the company upside down? Tell them we're writing it." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "And please call Ms. Ruth. Make sure Amara's set for Monday." "Car seat, snacks, the works." Janet's face softened. "Already done." That evening, he drove past the neighborhood where he grew up. The barbershop still had the same sign, only more faded. A boy about Amara's age stood outside a corner, store selling candy from a plastic bin. The city, with all its sharp edges and bright angles, kept making room and failing to make room in equal measure. He parked a few blocks from the hospital and walked the rest of the way, past murals that turned brick into memory, names of those lost to asthma in old apartments, to police stops gone wrong, to the quiet violence of inequity that never makes headlines. He stood there longer than he intended, letting the paint speak a language he recognized, but rarely allowed himself to hear. On Monday, the office felt different before anyone said a word. Perhaps it was only in him. He checked the conference room, whiteboard clean, laptop ready, a glass of water set at each seat. At 3:02 p.m., the door opened, and Amara slipped in first, hair in neat twists, eyes alert without being anxious. Behind her came Denise in a navy suit that had been pressed within an inch of its life. The oxygen had been removed. The cough lingered but didn't own her. "Ms. Carter," Malcolm said, rising. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for making space for fairness," she returned. And it wasn't flattery. It was a marker placed neatly on the table between them. He introduced the panel: engineering, operations, finance. No one had been allowed to drop in. The room would either earn its reputation or surrender it today. Denise connected her slides and began, not with biography, not with a preemptive defense, but with systems. She made a case for stabilizing Meridian's chaotic vendor onboarding, showed where waste hid in plain sight, proposed a cross-functional sprint to draw out failure earlier, so it cost less to fix. When a senior engineer attempted the familiar derail, what happens when your childcare falls through? She didn't blink. "The same thing that happens when your servers do," she said. "I designed redundancy." Laughter rippled. Not cruel, not dismissive. Recognition. The engineer reddened, then nodded, a little chastened, a lot impressed. Amara, in the back corner with a workbook, looked up at her mother as if the horizon had shifted closer. Afterward, when the panel left to confer, Malcolm closed the door and exhaled. "You did not need me in that room," he said. "I needed you to open the door," Denise replied. "Opening is the part too many people forget." He nodded, accepting the correction as a gift rather than a wound. "There's an offer coming," he said. "With the flexibility framework we discussed. Salary at band top because I value outcomes, not explanations." He hesitated. "There will be attention. People will say I favored you." "They said that before they knew my name," she answered. "The difference now is I have receipts." He almost smiled. Then he grew serious. "I can't promise this place will always deserve you, but I can promise to make it answer when it doesn't." He walked them to the elevator. Amara reached for the call button and missed by an inch. He pressed it without fanfare. As the doors opened, Denise turned, the fluorescent light catching on the tiny gold hoop in her ear. "Mr. Harlan," she said, and when he looked up, she met his eyes with a steadiness that felt like equal ground. "My daughter will remember this week for the rest of her life. Not because you helped us, but because you treated her as if she had a right to be taken seriously. That is justice in miniature. Don't lose it when the articles start." He knew enough of the world to know they would. He also knew that some fights are worth the cost of the invitation. "I won't," he said. That night, when the building was quiet, he stood in his office with the lights off and the city glittering beyond the glass. He thought of the murals, the barber shop, the bus depot name tag he'd watched his mother hang on a peg beside the door every night, tired hands still smelling of bleach and courage. He thought of a little girl crossing a marble lobby because dignity had taught her to keep moving. He opened his laptop and began to write. Not a memo, not a press release, but a plan that named what too many plans avoided naming: whose lives were measured, whose labor was discounted, and what would change now that the door had been opened on purpose. He wrote until the words felt like a promise instead of a performance. When he finally shut the lid, he could still see the star sticker in his mind, catching the light like a small, insistent truth. We were here, and we asked to be seen, and now the work is yours. The ink was barely dry on the offer letter before the whispers began. Denise Carter had barely stepped into her new office, a small space near the operations wing, its walls still bare, when she felt the weight of eyes following her. Colleagues paused mid-conversation as she passed. Assistants leaned closer over, their keyboards as if the sound of typing could cover their words. She had worked long enough to recognize the shape of suspicion. In the corporate world, rumors had sharper edges than glass. "Special treatment," one voice muttered as she walked to the break room. "Straight from the hospital bed to an executive. Salary. She'll be gone in 6 months," another whispered. "Single moms never last." Denise poured her coffee slowly, refusing to flinch. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated. It wouldn't be the last. Amara's face floated in her mind, her steady gaze in that marble lobby, the way she'd looked at her mother with unshakable belief. Denise stirred her coffee once, placed the spoon down carefully, and went back to her office. Belief, she reminded herself, had to start with her. Upstairs in the executive suite, the storm had already begun. Victoria Sloan, HR director, closed the boardroom door behind her and placed a neatly bound report in front of Malcolm. "Perception matters," she said crisply. "Whatever your intentions, the optics of creating a new initiative immediately after hiring Denise Carter are questionable. Shareholders are already asking if policies are being driven by personal connections rather than company needs." Malcolm leafed through the report without looking up. "And the numbers?" She hesitated. "Too early to tell." "Then don't. Bring me optics without outcomes," he said flatly. "Ms. Carter is qualified and the initiative is overdue. If the board prefers inertia, they can bring me alternatives that work better. Until then, this stands." Victoria pressed her lips together, the steel behind her smile showing through. "You're making enemies you don't need." "Then I'll learn to live with them," he replied. But that night, alone in his penthouse, Malcolm felt the edges of the choice cut deeper than he let on. He had spent decades cultivating power through predictability, quarterly growth, clean margins, silent personal life. Now, with one decision, he had invited scrutiny into both his leadership and his past. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and stood by the window, the lights of Atlanta blinking below. For years, he had believed safety meant distance. Yet that distance had left him with nothing but victories that tasted like ash. 2 weeks later, Denise presented her first plan to a cross-departmental team. The room was thick with skepticism. A director from finance leaned back with arms crossed. "This is ambitious. Too ambitious. You're proposing vendor audits in Q3? That's impossible with our current staff." Denise clicked to the next slide. "Not impossible. Inefficient the way it's been done. I've mapped redundancies. 3 departments are running parallel processes without coordination. We consolidate, we cut the hours in half." A murmur went around the room. The data was hard to argue with. Still, another manager tried. "And if something falls through the cracks?" Denise met his gaze evenly. "Then we adjust. Perfection isn't the goal. Progress is. That's how resilient systems are built." There was silence. Slowly, one of the analysts at the end of the table, young, nervous, raised her hand. "This actually makes sense. We've been flagging those overlaps for months, but no one listened." She looked at Denise almost with relief. "It feels like somebody finally did." By the end of the meeting, the resistance hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. Skepticism had given way to reluctant consideration. That night, when Denise returned home exhausted, Amara had dinner waiting. Peanut butter sandwiches cut into stars. "You're the boss now," Amara announced, eyes wide with pride. "I'm not the boss." Denise laughed softly, sinking into a chair. "I'm just trying to do my job." "Then why do people act scared when you talk?" Denise hesitated. "How do you explain power dynamics to a child?" "Because change makes people uncomfortable," she said finally, "especially when it comes from someone they didn't expect." Amara nodded, thoughtful. "Then keep changing things." At school, kids teased her for saying her mom worked with the CEO. Some asked if she was lying. Amara bore it with a strange composure, repeating her mother's mantra, "Dignity doesn't need an audience." But at night, when she crawled into bed, she whispered to her stuffed bear, "Please let Mama keep this job. Please let her be seen for who she is." The pushback grew sharper by the end of the month. An anonymous article appeared in a trade newsletter. Meridian CEO plays favorites, single mother given preferential treatment. The language was coded, but the intent was clear. Undermined Denise's legitimacy. She printed it out, placed it on her desk, and kept working. But Malcolm noticed the tightness in her shoulders during their weekly check-in. "They'll come for you harder now," he said. She straightened. "They've come for me before. Landlords, managers, even PTA moms. I'm still here. My work will speak. And if it doesn't?" She looked him squarely in the eyes. "Then I'll speak louder." For a moment, he felt the full weight of what courage looked like. Not in speeches or board votes, but in the quiet refusal to shrink. He thought of his mother again, and the way she had held her head high despite the world bending against her. 2 days later, Denise's plan went live. Within a week, vendor delays dropped by 12%. By the end of the quarter, savings exceeded projections. The same directors who had dismissed her now cited her slides in their own updates, often without attribution. but the data was undeniable. And data, in Malcolm's world, was ammunition. Still, the board's resistance sharpened. In a closed-door meeting, one elder member leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Malcolm, you've built this company on discipline." Now we're hearing words like equity and flexibility thrown around like slogans. "Investors don't pay for social experiments. They pay for results," Malcolm countered. "And results are exactly what Denise Carter is delivering." "You've become emotionally compromised," the man said bluntly. "This is about one employee and her child. We cannot set precedent on sentiment." Malcolm's voice cooled. "This isn't sentiment. This is justice. And if justice frightens us more than inefficiency, then perhaps the real compromise is our integrity." The room fell silent. For the first time, he realized the fight wasn't just about Denise's job or even company culture. It was about whether people like her, and children like Amara, would be permitted a seat in rooms designed to keep them out. That night, after another long day, Denise walked Amara home under the streetlights. They stopped at the corner store for milk, and the clerk, an old man who'd known their family for years, leaned over the counter. "Your mama's face is in the paper," he said, sliding over a copy. There she was in grainy print. "Project. Manager Carter leads cost-saving initiative at Meridian." Amara's eyes went wide. "You're famous." Denise shook her head, folding the paper. "Not famous, baby. Just visible. There's a difference. And visibility comes with a cost." Amara tilted her head. "Then we'll pay it." Her mother smiled faintly, brushing a hand over her daughter's braids. "That's what scares them most," she whispered. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. A glossy business blog published a headline designed to sting: "CEO's Pet Project? Favoritism or Futurism?" The article dissected Denise's hiring with surgical cruelty, painting her as an unqualified single mother catapulted into power by Malcolm's pity. It questioned whether her pneumonia had been exaggerated to manipulate sympathy, whether Amara's stunt in the lobby had been staged. The ugliest comments appeared in the margins, where anonymous voices called her lazy, irresponsible, even a fraud. By 10 a.m., Denise's phone buzzed with messages she wished she hadn't read. Neighbors forwarding links, an old coworker sending a half-hearted "hang in there," even Amara's teacher reaching out delicately. "Some of the parents are talking. I thought you should know." At her desk, Denise sat perfectly still. To flinch was to give the whispers power. She focused on her monitor, adjusted her spreadsheet columns, and pretended not to hear the footsteps gathering outside her office. But Amara's face haunted her. The way children absorb cruelty secondhand, not even knowing the language yet, only the sting. Malcolm stormed into the executive floor an hour later, the folded blog printout clenched in his fist. He threw it onto the boardroom table where 3 senior members were already waiting. Who leaked this? Victoria Sloan was gone, terminated after her last maneuver, but enemies had many faces. Gerald Thompson, the oldest board member, cleared his throat. "Leaks happen, Malcolm. What concerns us is the perception that your personal involvement with an employee is clouding your judgment." Malcolm leaned forward, his voice a low burn. "Her results are measurable. Vendor savings, process efficiency, morale uptick in operations. That's not perception, that's performance." "Performance isn't the only metric investors track," Gerald shot back. "They track stability, predictability, optics. This family-forward experiment of yours threatens all 3. Malcolm's jaw tightened. He had spent years cultivating composure, but the thought of Denise and Amara dragged through public mud sliced deeper than any market critique. He saw his mother's tired hands again, the way people had doubted her until she worked herself into silence. He would not watch. History repeat itself under his own roof. When the meeting adjourned, James Whitfield, his longtime confidant, lingered. "They're circling you, Malcolm. This isn't about Denise alone. This is about power. They think you've lost your edge." "Have I?" Malcolm asked quietly, not entirely sure himself. James studied him. "You found something sharper than edge. That scares them more than weakness ever could." Downstairs, Denise faced her own battle. A co-worker intercepted her in the hall, faux sympathy dripping from every word. "Rough morning, huh? Maybe this place isn't the right fit." "Nothing wrong with stepping aside gracefully." Denise stopped, the folder in her arms pressing against her ribs like armor. She looked the woman squarely in the eye. "I've stepped aside my whole life. When jobs didn't want mothers, when neighbors whispered about raising a child alone, when doors closed because I couldn't afford to push harder. Not this time. My work belongs here. And I'm staying. The solemn coworker blinked, taken aback by the calm fire in her voice. Denise walked on, her heels clicking a rhythm of refusal. That evening, she arrived home to find Amara sitting at the kitchen table with a furrowed brow. A newspaper lay open beside her math homework. Mama, they said you only got the job because Mr. Harlan felt sorry for you. Is that true? Denise swallowed the ache rising in her throat. She pulled out a chair, sat eye level with her daughter. Listen to me, baby. I got this job because I earned it, because I worked and studied and refused to give up. People who feel threatened will try to write different stories about you, ones that make them comfortable. But our truth doesn't disappear because they can't see it. Amara's lip trembled. But it hurts. Denise wrapped her arms around her. I know. Sometimes dignity hurts. But dignity means holding your head high even when others bow it for you. You understand? Amara nodded into her shoulder, small body shaking but steadying. Meanwhile, Malcolm called a press conference, something he hadn't done in years. The auditorium buzzed with cameras, journalists eager for blood. He took the stage, every inch the commanding CEO, but his words carried something new. Meridian has been accused of favoritism, he began. Let me be clear. Denise Carter was hired because she is brilliant, because she delivers measurable results, because ignoring talent due to outdated prejudices is not efficiency, it is failure. He paused, letting the words settle. For too long, corporate America has treated single parents, and especially Black single mothers, as liabilities. That ends here. We are piloting policies that support families because our future depends on it. This is not sentiment, this is justice, and justice is good business. The room erupted in questions, flashes blinding him, but Malcolm held the line. When it was over, his assistant whispered, "You just lit a fuse, then let it burn," he said. The fallout was swift. Half the press lauded him as a pioneer. The other half branded him reckless. Stock prices dipped, then bounced back, jittering like a heart caught between beats. Inside the company, alliances shifted. Some employees whispered praise in hallways. Too narrow for cameras, others plotted quietly with board members clinging to the old guard. Through it all, Denise kept working. She stayed late, refining models, guiding teams, never giving her critics the satisfaction of faltering. Yet at home, when Amara fell asleep, she sat by the window with exhaustion in her bones and wondered how long she could keep carrying both the work and the weight of being a symbol. Malcolm visited one evening under the pretense of delivering reports. Amara answered the door in pajamas, clutching her teddy bear. You came. I promised I would, he said softly. In the kitchen, Denise poured tea into chipped mugs. I didn't ask you to hold a press conference, she said. I know. You made it bigger than me. Because it is bigger than you, he said, meeting her gaze. But I should have asked. I don't want to turn your life into a headline. Denise sighed, staring into her cup. My life has been a headline since the day I started raising a daughter alone. At least now the story might help someone else. There was silence. Amara patted back in, rubbing her eyes. Mama, are you going to lose your job? Denise hesitated. Then Malcolm answered. Not if I have anything to say about it. And your mama's too good to lose. Amara climbed into her mother's lap, looking between them. Then we just have to be brave. Malcolm felt something shift inside him. The way a child's words can sometimes expose the truth adults bury. He had built a career on control, not courage. But maybe control had only ever been fear in disguise. As he drove home that night, the city stretched out before him, neon bleeding into darkness. For the first time in years, he wondered what it would mean not just to lead a company, but to change it. Not just to protect Denise and Amara, but to build something that made their survival no longer extraordinary, but expected. The board would not yield easily. He could already see the lines being drawn. But a new question burned in him. If not now, when? And if not for them, for who? The emergency board meeting was called for a Friday afternoon, the kind of hour chosen to catch people weary and compliant. But when Malcolm walked into the paneled room, he was anything but weary. Denise sat quietly at the far end, invited under the guise of providing context, though everyone knew she had been summoned as an exhibit in someone else's case. Amara waited outside with Janet, crayons scattered across a legal pad, unaware that her mother's career was about to be argued like a criminal trial. Gerald Thompson, the elder statesman of Meridian's board, opened the session with his usual gravitas. Mr. Harlan, The company is facing reputational risk. Your policies and your personal attachments have generated confusion in the marketplace. Investors question whether Meridian has lost its discipline. Malcolm folded his hands on the wire table. Investors questioned railroads when steel replaced iron. They questioned computers when typewriters still sold. Discipline is not rigidity. It is vision. And vision requires courage. Gerald's eyes narrowed. Let's not confuse corporate governance with crusades. This, he gestured toward Denise, is favoritism disguised as reform. We cannot allow one employee's personal circumstances to dictate company policy. Before Malcolm could answer, Denise spoke. Her voice was steady, clear. With respect, sir, my personal circumstances are the same ones faced by thousands of employees you've never bothered to notice. Single parents, caregivers, people balancing dignity with survival. The only difference is that my daughter walked into your lobby and refused invisibility. That isn't favoritism. That's truth finally seen. A murmur rippled around the table. Gerald bristled. Ms. Carter, you are here as a courtesy. Don't mistake it for standing. Denise leaned forward. Standing is not given, Mr. Thompson. It is taken. And I will not sit quietly while you erase the work I have delivered. Vendor savings, retention increases, measurable improvements. Numbers don't lie. Only prejudice does. Malcolm felt the surge of pride rise in his chest, the kind of pride that comes from watching someone refuse to shrink. He slid a folder across the table. Before you cast judgment, you should see this. Inside were documents retrieved quietly. Over the past month, internal memos from a decade ago outlining performance filters designed to disadvantage employees with family responsibilities. Email threads suggesting mothers were unreliable assets. Some bore Gerald's own initials at the bottom. The room froze. These are relics, Gerald snapped, color rising in his face. Outdated policies that no longer apply. Outdated? Malcolm's voice was quiet, but the steel in it silenced the room. Then why did Denise Carter sit through 8 interviews this year where the same coded questions were asked? Why do our own HR surveys show parents under 40 reporting the highest attrition rates? Outdated policies echo until someone breaks them. Today, we break them. James Whitfield, his longtime ally, cleared his throat. I move that we formalize the Family Forward Initiative across all divisions, not as experiment, but as policy. Effective immediately. I second, another board member said, surprising everyone. Gerald slammed his palm on the table. You'll destroy Meridian's reputation. No, Malcolm said, rising to his feet. We will rebuild it. And if Meridian cannot survive justice, then it does not deserve to survive at all. The vote was called. 1 by 1, hands lifted. 11 in favor. 3 opposed. The motion passed. Gerald's face hardened, but the numbers were undeniable. When the meeting adjourned, Denise slipped out quietly, shoulders trembling not with fear, but release. In the hallway, Amara ran to her, crayons smudged on her fingers. Mama! Did you win? Denise knelt, gathering her into her arms. Baby, we didn't just win. We were heard. Malcolm watched them, the sight tugging at places in him he had long sealed off. He thought of his mother again, how she would have smiled to see a black woman standing tall in a boardroom designed to keep her out. He thought of all the fathers, mothers, children who had been casualties of silence. And for the first time, he felt that silence breaking. That evening, the 3 of them walked out together into the Atlanta dusk. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Denise didn't bow her head. She held Amara's hand, chin high, steps steady. Malcolm walked beside them, not as savior but as ally. On Monday, Denise returned to work to find her office filled, with flowers from employees across the building. Notes slipped under her door read, "Thank you for making us visible. Thank you for proving we belong." She pinned them on her bulletin board, each one a fragment of dignity stitched back together. For Amara, life shifted too. At school, when classmates teased her again, she no longer whispered to her bear. She looked them in the eyes and said, "My mom changes things. That's what real power looks like." Malcolm, meanwhile, convened a press conference not in the marble lobby but in the operations wing, surrounded by employees who had never been invited to the spotlight. Denise stood beside him, Amara perched proudly in the front row. "This is not the story of one woman," he told the cameras. "This is the story of every worker told to choose between family and livelihood. This is about dismantling a lie. that justice and profitability are opposites. They are not. They are partners. And starting today, Meridian will prove it. The applause that followed wasn't just corporate courtesy. It was release, recognition, a hunger for something long overdue. Weeks later, when the first quarterly report after the policy change showed profits climbing rather than falling, even the skeptics had to admit the truth. Efficiency and equity had never been enemies. The lie had simply been convenient. At home, Denise tucked Amara into bed with the newspaper folded neatly on the nightstand. The headline read, "Meridian leads corporate shift toward family equity." Amara's eyes drooped sleepily. "Mama?" "Yes, baby." "You think they'll remember us?" Denise kissed her forehead. "They'll remember the work. And the work will carry your name in ways you can't see yet." In another part of the city, Malcolm stood at his window again, bourbon untouched at his side. The skyline no longer looked like a fortress. It looked like a canvas. He thought of his mother's hands, of the doors she could never open. And he thought of Amara's star sticker catching the light. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of losing control. He was learning what it meant to build not monuments, but legacies. Not empires of fear, but foundations of dignity. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning.